Hello, whisky fans. I'm Ralphie. I am your host. You're probably interested in whisky, so let me introduce you to the Whisky Bothy, somewhere in the middle of the Irish Sea. Very much a whisky making centre of the planet is the Irish Sea, because you've got Ireland on one side and you've got Scotland on the other. You've got Wales in there as well, and a little bit of England. All very competent whisky making nations. I'm going to focus in this review number 1073, on a whisky that I have a little bit of history with. It's a single malt Scotch whisky from Speyside. It's coastal. It is less well known. It's not one of these recognisable jump out brands that gets heavily pushed in marketing campaigns. It's Glenglassaugh Distillery. This is the Sand End edition, a bottling on a recent relaunch and reinvigoration of availability of Glenglassaugh Distillery whisky. We'll start with pouring a glass, and then I'll furnish you with a bit more information. I'm pouring a glass to let it open up, breathe, aerate, and become more accessible to my palate. When you're pouring whisky, pour a glass and let it sit for at least 10 to 15 minutes before you do anything. It always does more good than it ever does harm. And also it tends to fill the air around you with a lovely, pleasant whisky smell. Something like Glenglassaugh Sand End, I would say you can't go wrong, actually. I'm pleasantly surprised with this bottling. What would it be, about the late 90s, when I first discovered Glenglassaugh through Cadenhead's independent bottlers. And I thought, this is a really delightful whisky because it is so quintessentially what one expects from Speyside region. It's kind of grain-led, there's that sweetness to it, but it also has a little bit of savoury, almost herbaceous complexity, which makes it, particularly with some age, remarkably delicate in its style. And I miss these styles of whisky because I can't really find them so often these days unless I go to auction. So the Sand End bottling, it's a non-age statement whisky, but it is bottled at a very reassuring 50.5% alcohol. On the back of the label, it does say, where's my steampunker so I get this right and I'm not just paraphrasing. It says that Sand End is matured in bourbon, sherry and manzanilla casks for the luscious waves of flavour. Do you get it? Waves, Sand End, coastal distillery. Yeah, that's what marketing's all about. What they don't say is, have they used 3 separate casks blended together of the Glenglassaugh single malt, or have they transferred from bourbon to sherry to manzanilla casks? Interesting, the fact they say sherry and manzanilla, because manzanilla is a form of sherry. So I think what they're really telling us there is that they have used authentic. Because with manzanilla, like Fino, for example, another style of sherry, and Amontillado is another good example, what you find is that the casks being used have genuinely matured sherry, rather than being specifically prepared and seasoned for the Scotch whisky industry. Looking at the colour, by the way, you'll see that it is relatively light. I think, in my opinion, some colourant has been added, because if it hadn't been added, they'd have said so in the label, if they know their business. So I don't think it's entirely natural colour, but in fairness, they've been light-handed on the use of caramel colouring. Has it been chill filtered? To some extent, yes. But I think they've pulled up short and not completely flavour stripped it, as you do get with excessive chill filtration. So what have we got on the nose? The first and immediate thing that you'll notice No peat. There's no peat going on in here. There may be something, just a tiny kiss of peat right in the background, but by and large, this is an unpeated barley grain led experience, which is greatly helped by the strength. When you nose it, you're not going to get 50.5% alcohol on the nose, which suggests to us, of course, that the calibre of maturation has been more active. So they're using better quality casks. You also notice in the nose it's clean, it's fresh, it's slightly zesty, and to be honest, it's really quite promising. I'm also getting a slight perfume note, a perfume called Issey Miyake. For all you perfumier aficionados out there, it's a Japanese, pseudo-Japanese perfume, which is slightly musky, sweaty, fresh fruit, spicy, aromatic. That's the kind of theme around it, and I'm getting a little bit of that on the nose. First taste. Slow start, builds sweet and sour. Sour gets more prominent. Flavour grows rapidly and substantially. A little touch of bubble gum, cola, fresh fruit, roast banana, seasonal fresh apples. You know, the ones that you get with flavour. So the ones you haven't bought in a supermarket. That style of apple. And there is also a mild, creamy apricot note. In amongst it, there's a little bit of toasted marzipan. First impressions are very positive. I have to say, I'm delighted to see that this very neglected and frankly unlucky distillery is actually getting a decent presentation after such a long time languishing in what's called the doldrums. The doldrums is a fancy word for not having a good time. It's something I'm going to add some water here, and then while the water's opening up the spirit, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Glenglassaugh. Full 5 millilitres, 1 teaspoon of water. Why am I adding it? To open the whisky up. Does it dilute the alcohol slightly? Yes, it does. Helps chase off the flavour. One of the questions I sometimes get is, hey Ralphie, the bottling strength is what the distillers have decided and the master blenders decided you should be drinking at. So what do you think you're doing adding even more water because you're just diluting it and having less flavour? Well, this couldn't be further from the truth. The fact is, when you add water, it amplifies the flavour. It amplifies the nose, and it sustains the development over time of the spirit in the glass. It's what it does. It helps it to develop as a more complex experience over time. One of the problems with pre-diluted whiskies at 40% is that when you pour a glass, because the alcohol is weaker, there is simply less that's available to be done. If you add or don't add water, you tend to get a more monochromic experience. Of course, some would say that with your standard blended whisky these days, maybe that's not such a bad thing. No, I would tend to agree. So I've added some water here, not a lot. I have noticed with practice and perseverance, a certain amount of Scotch mist appears in the glass, but not as much as I would be expecting, especially considering that this is a young whisky and it's been proactively matured. So there's been good, solid cask engagement. The fusion of the casks is very well done. This is a professionally constructed whisky event, and it is quite obvious to see that. On a little separate note, you'll notice the cork, the stopper. Does it remind you of another brand? Yes, They're basically using a fractionally lighter shade of Bruichladdich green. I don't think it makes a huge impact, but for experienced whisky drinkers, you're going to pick up on that. I think they could have been a wee bit more singular in the colour, the branding. And to be honest, I think they could have put more information on the label. At least they could have told us if it was natural colour or not, or if it was chill filtered or not. Really, we're looking for that information. There's no excuses in this day and age when there's a consumption crisis facing the injury, Freudian slip that, industry. Yeah, the industry does have injuries. Yeah. But that's another subject. Really, I think the bottlers need to be a little bit more well-informed when they're packaging and presenting whisky to the market, particularly when they're giving us a full strength experience, but not quite joining up all the dots in disclosure. Disclosure is hugely important. Even if it's a passive consumer that just happens to like the fact that it's a big, strong, fruity flavour, at least they should have the option of having some honest disclosure on the label that it has been prepared and presented in a certain way. Unchill filtered and natural colour. Anyway, moving on. Let's get back to the glass here. On the nose, still soft in the nose. This is very, very slightly rosewater ginger, just a hint, just a fractional hint, not a lot. The ginger does become a little more prominent in development of the whisky, but it does remain an intense, soft, grain-led, fruity single malt experience, and a very pleasant one at that. So, the fact that Glenglassaugh is back in our radar, it's lovely to see that at least the distillery is getting a chance to express its signature now. Now we've actually got bottlings of the stuff that are available, accessible, and importantly affordable. But this is different from the old school bottlings. I'm going to tell you the reason why. I've mentioned it a few times in the past. But probably about 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago, the manager of the distillery swapped the stills around. So the wash still became the spirit still, and the spirit still became the wash still. And this was done for volume efficiency, because the capacity of the wash still was greater than the capacity of the spirit still. In my opinion, this has been a huge mistake, a massive mistake. You don't mess with the system that was originally set up historically by people who really, really know what they are doing. You don't mess with history. This is why you can't bulldoze a distillery like Talisker and just start again with brand new buildings and lots of whitewash to make it look the part for the tourists. It doesn't work that way. Taste. Big, soft, intense, beautifully sweet and sour, almost crispy, almost effervescent. There is actually a kind of champagne, almost a sweet champagne side to this, which I'm really enjoying. But the development is kind of fairly static. The big events in the arrival and the initial development, and then immediately get to the centre of the development, it starts to fade, but it fades softly, it fades gently. The vanilla becomes more prominent. There's a little bit of almond note, a little bit of toasted, lightly toasted frangipane or marzipan in there, probably a combination of the two, to be honest, because it's not too distinctive. And in the finish, the tannins are soft, crisp and light. Good quality casks have been used in this distillery. Thank goodness. It shows this is a very commendable and decent single malt. If you're looking for something which is quintessentially sort of Highland Speyside, with a little bit of savoury note, a little bit of herbaceousness in the development, understated, although it does become more prominent after about 20-25 minutes in the glass. And I'm just beginning to see a little bit of Scotch mist appear in the glass, which is also reassuring as well. Although recently, when I was experimenting and leaving the glass overnight with a lid on it in the fridge, I didn't see too much. I saw a little Scotch mist, but it was just enough to do the job. But it was nothing special. What mark am I going to give this? I'm going to give this a very commendable 82 out of 100. That is my malt mark. And if you pop back again, I'm going to basically be discussing something in relation to Glenglassaugh. It's part of my Thinking Aloud series, because pouring and having a glass of single malt is a very good time for reflection. And I'm reflecting in the history that I have with Glenglassaugh, which has been, frankly, a difficult relationship. But it's not just Glenglassaugh. Other distilleries are affected with a lack of prominence, I would call it prominence. So I'm going to discuss that in 1073 extras, coming along shortly. See you there.